The roar of the crowd fades. The clamor for applause stills. For too long, the modern man has mistaken the echo of approval for the sound of his own worth. He builds empires on shifting sands, tethered to the opinions of strangers. But what happens when the performance ends and the man is left alone with himself? This is the narrative of liberation. Not the liberation of a grand escape, but the quiet, internal emancipation that comes from ceasing the exhausting dance of seeking approval. The man who stops chasing the nodding heads and whispered praises discovers a terrain within himself he never knew existed. It is a landscape of raw truth, unvarnished by the need to please. Consider the immense energy expended in tailoring one's actions, words, and even thoughts to fit the perceived expectations of others. It is a constant performance, a mental tightrope walk where the slightest misstep risks social censure. This ceaseless vigilance drains the vital force, leaving the spirit hollowed and the will fractured. The cost is a life lived in the shadow of others' desires, never truly inhabiting one's own skin. A man may spend years perfecting the art of being agreeable, of being seen as competent, kind, or successful by external metrics. He might achieve a semblance of success, a facade of acceptance, but beneath the polished surface, a gnawing dissatisfaction often festers. The rewards, a fleeting compliment, a brief moment of acceptance, are ephemeral, failing to satisfy the deeper hunger for genuine self-worth. This hunger can only be satiated from within. The turning point arrives not with a thunderclap, but with a profound weariness. A realization that the energy poured into managing perceptions could be reinvested in building a solid inner foundation. It begins with a single deliberate act, withdrawing from a pointless argument, declining a request that compromises integrity, or simply choosing to remain silent when agreement feels hollow. This withdrawal is not an act of selfishness, but of profound self-preservation. It is the reclamation of sovereignty over one's own mind and spirit. The initial moments can feel like stepping off a cliff into the void. The silence where praise used to be can be deafening. The absence of external affirmation can feel like isolation. This is the critical juncture where many retreat back to the familiar comfort of seeking approval. But for the man who perseveres, the void begins to fill, not with external validation, but with an emergent sense of self. He starts to listen to the quiet whispers of his own intuition, to recognize the resonance of his own values. The opinions of others, once the bedrock of his identity, begin to recede, becoming merely background noise. He learns that true confidence is not a performance, but a quiet knowing. It is the certainty that arises from aligning one's actions with one's deepest convictions, regardless of external reception. This alignment fosters an unshakable inner stability, a resilience that can weather the storms of criticism and indifference. Epictetus, the slave-turned-philosopher, understood this deeply. He taught that we have control over our judgments and desires, but not over external events or the opinions of others. True freedom, he argued, lies in recognizing this distinction and focusing our energy solely on what is within our power, our own thoughts and actions. The man who masters this principle is no longer a puppet dancing to the tune of societal expectations. He begins to see the world differently. The pressures to conform, to acquire, to impress, lose their urgency. His motivations shift from extrinsic rewards to intrinsic satisfaction. The joy of mastering a skill for its own sake, the quiet pride of integrity maintained, the deep contentment of living authentically. These become his guiding stars. This does not imply a descent into misanthropy or a stubborn refusal of all social connection. Rather, it cultivates relationships built on a foundation of mutual respect and authentic self-expression, rather than dependency on flattery. He can offer his true self, not a curated version designed for acceptance. What is the greatest benefit of this transformation? It is the profound peace that settles within. The anxiety of constant evaluation dissipates. The emotional energy once consumed by managing others' perceptions is now available for growth, for creation, for meaningful contribution. He becomes a man anchored, not adrift. He finds that his voice, when finally freed from the obligation to please, carries a new weight. His decisions, when guided by inner conviction, possess a clarity and purpose that commands genuine, albeit perhaps quieter, respect. This is the silent strength of a man who has found his own center. He learns that true influence is not about being liked, but about being true. His actions, unburdened by the need for approval, become a more potent expression of his character. He radiates an integrity that draws others not through manipulation or performance, but through authenticity. This journey is not for the faint of heart. It requires confronting the deeply ingrained habits of seeking validation and facing the discomfort of potential disapproval. It demands a courage that can only be found within, a willingness to stand nakedly as oneself in a world that often rewards masks. The ancient Stoics spoke of virtue as the sole good. This means that a man's worth is found not in his possessions, his status, or the opinions of others, but in the quality of his character and his adherence to reason and justice. When a man internalizes this truth, the external world loses its power to dictate his sense of self. He becomes a man whose inner compass is calibrated to his own moral north. He is no longer swayed by the shifting winds of popular opinion. His actions are driven by principle, not by the desire for applause. This is the genesis of true resilience and enduring self-respect. The man who stops chasing approval is not a man who rejects society. He is a man who has finally learned to be his own society. He has found the unshakable foundation of self-worth, and from this bedrock he can build a life of purpose and meaning, independent of the fleeting judgments of the world. He discovers that the applause he craved was always within reach, a quiet affirmation of a life lived with integrity. The truest validation is not heard in the cheers of a crowd, but felt in the steady rhythm of his own heart, beating in time with his own unwavering truth. The performance is over. The man remains.